Brian often thought his life with Abigail felt like something out of a dream. He genuinely believed he'd found a partner who shared his values of trust and mutual respect. With her radiant smile and fiercely independent nature, Abigail had a way of capturing his admiration. She valued having her own space, and that was something Brian not only understood but deeply respected. He never wanted to be the kind of husband who felt the need to control her every move. Maybe that's why he felt such pride when she mentioned taking a trip with her friends to Miami. "That sounds perfect, honey. You deserve a chance to unwind," he told her with a warm, sincere smile. The first few days of her trip seemed to fly by without a hitch. Abigail kept in touch often, sending Brian a steady stream of updates, photos of breathtaking beaches, snapshots of her and her friends laughing together, and even a quick video of a cozy seaside restaurant where they had dinner. Each message reassured Brian that their bond was as strong as ever, even with miles between them. But something shifted on the last night of her trip. It was subtle at first, her absence that evening tugged at the back of his mind. Still, Brian reminded himself not to let his insecurities get the better of him. His mother's words came to him, "Don't go stirring up storms when there aren't any clouds in the sky." Even so, the unease lingered. Abigail had always been quick to respond to his messages, no matter how busy she was. But that night, her reply was short and uncharacteristically vague. "I think I overate. Feeling exhausted, so I'm heading to bed early." Brian wanted to take her words at face value, but the message stuck with him. It felt rushed, almost as if she was avoiding further conversation. The next day, Abigail walked through the door, her face lit up with a smile that could brighten any room. She wrapped Brian in a warm hug and launched into stories about the trip, how much fun she'd had with her friends, the shopping, and how refreshing it was to take a break from everyday life. Brian tried to push aside the nagging thoughts in his mind. "She's glowing. The trip obviously did her good," he told himself as he watched her unpack. Yet, beneath the surface of her cheerful demeanor, something didn't feel quite right. Small things began to gnaw at him, things he couldn't quite put his finger on. Maybe it was the way she looked away when he casually asked about her last evening in Miami. Or perhaps it was how quickly she brushed off the topic, saying she'd lost track of time. Despite his efforts to stay composed, Brian's unease grew. He tried not to let it show, continuing to be the supportive and loving husband he had always prided himself on being. But as the days went by, that sense of discomfort refused to fade. He started questioning whether his unwavering trust in Abigail had been a leap of faith he hadn't thought through. Then, out of nowhere, an unexpected moment brought those doubts roaring to life. Brian was lounging on the couch one evening, lost in thought, when Abigail's laptop chimed with an email notification. The device sat on the coffee table, its screen lighting up with a subject line that caught his eye, "Thank you for your visit, Ocean Breeze Restaurant." The title gave him pause. It wasn't a place he recognized, and something about it tugged at his curiosity. Almost without thinking, he reached for the laptop and clicked on the email. It was a polite message, thanking Abigail for dining at the restaurant. "As a keepsake, we've attached a photo of your experience with us," it read. The email closed with a friendly invitation to return soon. The photo attached seemed innocent enough, at first. But when Brian opened it, his heart sank. There was Abigail, sitting at a table illuminated by soft candlelight, wearing an elegant black dress he'd never seen before. She wasn't alone. Across the table sat a man Brian didn't recognize, his smile confident and easy as he appeared to hold Abigail's hand. What struck him the most was her expression in the photo. It wasn't just the dress or the man, it was the look on her face that made his chest tighten. She looked content, genuinely happy, almost glowing in a way Brian hadn't seen in quite some time. For several long seconds, Brian stared at the photo, his mind scrambling to make sense of what he was seeing. It was like his brain refused to accept the implications of the image. Maybe he's just a friend of one of her friends, he thought, grasping at straws to calm the storm of emotions that had begun to brew inside him. But as he studied the photo again, the reality became harder to deny. The setting was too formal, the pose too intimate, and the fact that she hadn't mentioned this dinner at all, despite all her trip stories, made it clear that Abigail was keeping something from him. With a sharp motion, Brian closed the laptop, as if slamming it shut could erase the image from his mind. But no matter how much he tried, the picture stayed vivid, replaying over and over in his thoughts. His heart raced, and a tight knot formed in his throat. For a brief moment, he considered confronting Abigail right then and there, but the words eluded him. Even if he asked, could he trust that she'd tell him the truth? One thing became clear, that photo wasn't enough. He needed answers, real, undeniable answers. He had to understand the context, whether that dinner was an innocent coincidence or something far more significant. Questions swirled in his mind, refusing to let him rest. Why hadn't Abigail mentioned the restaurant? Who was that man? And why did she seem so at ease, so comfortable with him? Brian sat frozen on the couch, replaying the last few days in his head. Little things began to surface, details he hadn't paid attention to before. Since returning from Miami, Abigail seemed glued to her phone, almost protective of it, as if guarding a secret. He couldn't decide if his mind was creating connections where there weren't any or if he was finally noticing things he'd chosen to overlook before. In that moment, Brian made a decision. If Abigail was hiding something, he would uncover it. He couldn't live with the doubt gnawing at him. Though the sting of betrayal was still settling in, another emotion started to take root, resolve. He knew he couldn't act on impulse, he needed to stay calm and deliberate. The photo was just the beginning, but he was determined to uncover the full story, no matter the cost. The following days felt surreal, like he was watching his life unfold from the outside. The email's photo haunted him, always lingering at the edge of his thoughts. He wanted to demand answers from Abigail immediately, but deep down, he knew rushing in without proof would only lead to more evasions, or worse, carefully crafted lies. He needed something concrete. He needed certainty. But how could he get it? As he wrestled with these thoughts, he forced himself to act as if nothing had changed. Still, every interaction with Abigail now felt different, as though every word and gesture carried hidden meaning. She seemed quieter, less inclined to laugh at his usual morning jokes. Her phone, which she used to leave lying around casually, was now always tucked away, hidden in her pocket or bag, even when they were home together. And the hardest part? She seemed happier, but it was a happiness Brian felt excluded from. It was as if she had found joy in a life that didn't include him. Then, one afternoon, an opportunity presented itself. Abigail had hurried out to meet a friend and, in her rush, left her phone charging in the kitchen. Brian hesitated, his conscience weighing heavy on him. It's not right to look, he thought. What if I'm wrong? What if I ruin something that doesn't need fixing? But the image of that candle at dinner, and the unknown man, refused to leave him alone. With shaky hands, Brian picked up the phone and unlocked the screen. His heart pounded as he scrolled through the apps, his fingers finally stopping at her messages. There it was, a conversation with a name he didn't recognize, Ethan. Brian clicked on it, bracing himself. What he found confirmed every fear that had been eating away at him. Recent messages painted the picture in stark detail. I loved our dinner in Miami. I can't stop thinking about you. Hugging you before leaving felt so right. I miss you already. Abigail's reply, sent just the night before, was there in plain sight. Me too. Every moment with you feels special. I can't wait for us to meet again. Brian read the messages again and again, each word cutting deeper than the last. His chest tightened, and his hands trembled as he scrolled further. The chat left no room for doubt. This wasn't a friendly exchange or a one-off encounter. The thread was filled with photos of them together, affectionate messages, and even plans to meet again soon. It was all there, laid bare in the phone he had seen her holding so many times. What shattered Brian completely was a particular message from Ethan, sent just before Abigail returned from Miami. "I hope you're ready to tell him soon. You deserve to be happy." Brian let the phone slip from his hand, the weight of betrayal pressing down on him until he felt like he couldn't breathe. This wasn't just a physical affair, it was something deeper, something planned. There was intent behind her actions, a future she was considering that didn't include him. And yet, she had walked back into their home with a glowing smile, acting like everything was perfectly normal. He felt an overwhelming urge to scream, to cry, to confront her on the spot. But then, amidst the chaos of his emotions, a different thought began to take shape. If Abigail thought she could control the narrative, Brian wasn't going to let her. He wouldn't confront her, not yet. Instead of letting the pain consume him, Brian decided he would channel it into something else. He needed answers, but more than that, he wanted justice. As his thoughts raced, Brian began to envision a way to turn this situation on its head. If Abigail had been so meticulous in her lies and deception, he would be just as deliberate in exposing the truth. And that's when the seed of a plan began to grow. Over the following days, Brian poured himself into preparing for what he was about to do. Known for his patience and logical thinking, he resolved not to act recklessly. Abigail believed he was clueless about what was happening, and he would use her overconfidence against her. If she had lied so methodically, it was only fair that her lies be revealed with the same level of precision. One sleepless night, as he lay staring at the ceiling, the pieces of his plan started falling into place. Abigail's birthday was just around the corner, and she had been buzzing with excitement about throwing a grand celebration. "This year, I want a party that's truly unforgettable," she had mentioned casually the week before. Brian had nodded, smiling in agreement, even as he silently savored the bitter irony of her words. "Oh, it'll be unforgettable, all right," he thought. In the days that followed, Brian set his plan in motion. He reserved an elegant venue, hired decorators, and organized every detail to match Abigail's vision: fresh flowers, twinkling lights, a carefully curated playlist, everything perfect on the surface. He made sure to invite all the right people, close family, including Abigail's highly conservative parents who adored her and saw her as the perfect daughter. He extended invitations to their friends and her co-workers, ensuring the room would be filled with the most significant people in her life. The final touch was hiring an audiovisual team. Brian told everyone he wanted to create a special tribute to Abigail, a slideshow of cherished moments from their life together. It was framed as a thoughtful and romantic gesture. But the truth was far more sinister. Brian spent long nights meticulously editing a video that would begin with happy memories of their life together but would end with the brutal reality, the incriminating messages, the damning photos, and that fateful selfie at the restaurant that had set everything in motion. When the day of the party arrived, the venue was flawless. Abigail looked stunning as she mingled with the guests, laughing and thanking Brian for all his effort. He greeted everyone with a calm smile, keeping his emotions buried beneath a composed exterior, his mind laser-focused on the moment that was fast approaching. Every second felt like an eternity as he waited, watching the room hum with soft music and the clinking of champagne glasses. He needed everyone settled and unsuspecting before delivering his reveal. Finally, the time came. Brian stepped onto the small stage at the center of the room, holding a microphone. His voice was steady, his tone deliberate as he addressed the crowd. "Thank you all for coming tonight. This evening is about celebrating Abigail, the incredible woman we all know and love. I wanted to create something special to show just how much she means to me, and to all of you. So, I put together a video of some of my favorite memories with her. I hope you'll enjoy it." The lights dimmed, and the large screen behind him lit up. The video began with images of their wedding day, bright smiles, loving glances, and the joy of their union. It transitioned to photos of family trips, shared milestones, and heartfelt moments that drew soft murmurs and sighs from the audience. Abigail watched, her eyes glistening with emotion as she soaked in a nostalgic montage. For now, everything seemed perfect. But Brian knew the moment of truth was just around the corner. And then, the entire mood shifted. The soft, sentimental music that had accompanied the video was abruptly replaced by a stark sound, the chime of a message notification, amplified through the speakers. The words that appeared on the screen were stark and undeniable. "I loved our dinner in Miami. Can't stop thinking about you." The room plunged into an uneasy silence. Then came the image, a high-definition photo of Abigail and Ethan at the restaurant, her in that elegant black dress, holding hands across the table. Gasps rippled through the crowd, followed by murmurs of disbelief. Abigail sat frozen in her seat, her face drained of all color. The video didn't stop there. One by one, screenshots of her messages with Ethan began to flash across the screen, detailing their affair in explicit clarity. The tension in the room became unbearable. Abigail's father, Thomas, stood abruptly, his face flushed with fury, while her mother, Linda, stifled sobs, pressing a trembling hand to her mouth. "How could you?" Thomas said, his voice thick with anger and disappointment. Abigail pushed herself up from her chair, her hands shaking violently as she tried to find the words to speak. But her voice caught in her throat, leaving her stammering in front of the crowd. Brian remained motionless on stage, his silence as pointed as the images on the screen. He let the truth play out for everyone to see, standing calm and still while the weight of the revelations crushed the room. When the video concluded, Brian descended from the stage with deliberate steps, walking right past Abigail without so much as a glance. He didn't need to say anything, the evidence had spoken louder than any words he could have uttered. Abigail reached out, her voice cracking, "Please, Brian. Let me explain. It's not what you think. Just give me a chance to talk." But Brian kept walking, his focus shifting to a group of friends on the far side of the room. Abigail's pleas fell flat as the circle of judgmental stares around her grew tighter. The birthday celebration that was meant to be a joyous affair had turned into a devastating public reckoning. Moments later, Brian left the venue, leaving Abigail behind to face the fallout of her actions. The once bustling room, full of laughter and music, now felt heavy with an unbearable silence. As he stepped out, the scene inside dissolved into chaos. Abigail stood paralyzed, surrounded by whispers and disapproving glances. It was as if the ground beneath her had disappeared, and she was left suspended in the weight of her choices. Linda sat in a nearby chair, her face ashen, clutching a damp handkerchief like it was the only thing grounding her. Thomas remained standing, his expression a mixture of rage and sorrow as he stared at his daughter. Finally, he broke the silence. "Is it true?" he demanded, his voice cutting through the murmurs like a knife. Abigail's lips trembled as she tried to respond, "Dad, it's not that simple. Please, let me explain." But Thomas raised a hand to silence her, his disapproval palpable in the gesture. He didn't want explanations, the evidence had spoken for itself. One by one, the guests began to trickle out, some casting Abigail pitying looks while others barely hid their disgust. Her once tight circle of friends avoided eye contact, whispering among themselves as they hurried toward the exit. The flawless image Abigail had worked so hard to maintain was collapsing right before her eyes, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. By the time the last guest left, only the staff remained, quietly dismantling the decorations. Abigail finally dropped into a chair, the tears she'd been holding back spilling over. Her sobs came not just from humiliation but from the crushing reality that she had lost everything, Brian, her reputation, and the life she had built. Later that night, back at the house she and Brian had shared, Abigail sat on the couch, staring into the emptiness of the room. The familiar decor now felt lifeless, stripped of the warmth it once held. Deep down, she knew Brian wouldn't be coming back that night, if he ever came back at all. The silence in the house was deafening, mirroring the void left in her life. The sound of the phone ringing broke the heavy silence in the house, sparking a flicker of hope in Abigail's chest. It was her mother. "Abigail, I don't even know where to begin," Linda said, her voice laden with disappointment and sadness. "We raised you to be honest, to stand by your values. How could you let this happen?" Tears streamed down Abigail's face as she choked out her reply. "I made a mistake, Mom. I was lost, I felt so alone, I don't even know what I was thinking." But Linda wasn't swayed by her daughter's excuses. "Alone? No, Abigail, you weren't alone. You had Brian." This wasn't confusion, these were choices, choices that hurt not only him but all of us. "You've made this bed, and now you'll have to lie in it." Her mother's words cut deeper than Abigail expected. For the first time, she began to grasp the magnitude of the damage she'd caused, not just to her marriage but to the trust and respect of the people she held dearest. Desperation took hold as she tried calling Brian, her fingers trembling with each dial. But he didn't answer. She sent texts, pleading for a response, but they went unanswered too. The isolation was suffocating, and she started to wonder if there was any way to atone for the mess she had created. Meanwhile, Brian sat in a modest hotel room not far away, wrestling with conflicting emotions. Relief and sorrow tangled together in his chest. He knew the public way he had exposed Abigail was harsh, but deep down, he believed it was the only way to make her truly face the consequences of her actions. For the first time in weeks, he managed to fall asleep, though the ache in his heart was far from gone. He had lost someone he loved deeply, but he also knew he couldn't let betrayal dictate the rest of his life. The next morning, Abigail awoke in a house stripped of its warmth. The walls that once held happy memories now felt cold and empty. Standing by the window, she realized that before anyone else could forgive her, she would have to forgive herself, and that seemed like the hardest task of all. As the days turned into weeks, the emptiness in Abigail's life only grew. The silence in the house was oppressive, every corner a haunting reminder of what she'd destroyed. She kept trying to reach Brian, sending messages, heartfelt emails, even handwritten letters, but nothing seemed to bridge the chasm between them. The man who had once been her closest confidant now felt like a stranger, unreachable behind an invisible wall of hurt. Meanwhile, Brian began the slow process of rebuilding his life. He moved into a modest apartment in the heart of downtown, far removed from the house he had shared with Abigail. The simplicity of the space was a welcome change, it lacked the painful memories that once haunted him. His mornings were peaceful, and his evenings were spent with books, soft music, and the quiet comfort of solitude. For the first time in a long while, he could breathe. One crisp afternoon, while walking in a nearby park, Brian had an unexpected encounter. Rebecca, with her kind smile and gentle eyes, crossed his path. She was walking her golden retriever, Max, while Brian carried a steaming cup of coffee. Their meeting was accidental, a simple bump in passing, but it left an impression. Rebecca was unlike anyone Brian had met. She didn't pry into his past or push him to open up. Instead, she shared light-hearted, easy moments, exactly what Brian needed. Slowly, cautiously, he began to let his guard down. For the first time in what felt like forever, he found himself smiling without effort. Back in her world, Abigail faced the full weight of her choices. Her workplace, once a source of pride and accomplishment, now felt like a battleground. The looks from coworkers ranged from curious to outright judgmental, and every glance reminded her of how far she had fallen. What stung even more was the emotional distance from her parents. Conversations with Linda and Thomas were infrequent, and when they did happen, they were strained and superficial, filled with long pauses and unspoken disappointment. Abigail was left to navigate the aftermath of her actions alone, while Brian quietly rediscovered the parts of himself he thought he'd lost. Her mother, Linda, who had always been her staunchest supporter, now struggled to even look Abigail in the eye without her sadness showing. The final blow came on a quiet Sunday afternoon when Abigail visited her parents, hoping to rebuild some semblance of connection. The dinner was tense but uneventful until Thomas, her father, broke the silence. He rarely spoke about the situation, but this time his words were pointed. "Abigail, you had to know this would destroy your life," he said, his voice steady but heavy with disappointment. "You couldn't have thought you'd only lose Brian." His bluntness hit her like a punch to the gut, leaving her grasping for a response. I thought I could fix everything, Dad. I didn't realize it would end up like this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, thick with emotion. Thomas leaned back in his chair, his gaze firm. "And now? What will you do with what's left?" The question lingered in the air, its weight pressing down on her. It wasn't just a question, it was a challenge, one Abigail knew she would have to face alone. While Abigail tried to pick up the pieces of her life, Brian was finding his own strength to move forward. His relationship with Rebecca grew in ways he hadn't expected. Though he still carried the scars of betrayal, Rebecca's patience and understanding gave him the space he needed to heal at his own pace. She brought light and honesty into his world, never pushing but always steady. Little by little, Brian began to see that there was life after heartbreak. Love, though delicate, could still be rediscovered. Months later, Brian was surprised to find a letter from Abigail in his mailbox. It wasn't a plea for forgiveness or a request to start over. Instead, it was an honest acknowledgement of her mistakes, filled with regret but also acceptance of the consequences. "I destroyed something I can never rebuild," she wrote. "But I hope you find the happiness you deserve, something far greater than I was able to give you." Brian read the letter in silence, seated in the stillness of his small apartment. He didn't feel anger, nor did he feel relief. What settled in was a quiet sense of closure, the kind that allowed him to finally let go. He knew the chapter with Abigail had ended, and for the first time, he felt ready to move on. For Abigail, closure came in a different form. She found redemption by rebuilding herself from the inside out. Therapy helped her face the depths of her choices, and she gradually repaired her strained relationship with her parents. She poured her energy into volunteer work, focusing on helping women navigate difficult situations. Though the ache of losing Brian lingered as a reminder, she turned it into a source of strength to grow into someone better. Their story didn't end with reconciliation but with transformation. Each of them went their separate ways, learning lessons about honesty, respect, and the bravery it takes to start over. In the end, what mattered most was that life, despite its chaos and heartbreak, always finds a way to keep moving forward.